Wow, what a day on Outnumbered. Yeah. We had President Obama come in the middle of our hour, Outnumbered Overtime, OT, baby. We have this a lot at the noon hour. We have a lot of breaking news. People always ask online, you know, in social media, wow, everything happens at noon.
It's not just President Obama. Donald Trump likes to talk in our hours.
Yeah, everybody does, right? We come out and I feel emotional. I don't know if you guys do, because we got a lecture from a president and I feel like we did something wrong. Talk to me, Melissa.
Yeah. No, it was like what we've done to deserve this. I mean, it was sort of...
Speaking of Orlando.
Yeah, talking about Orlando. I mean, he was really totally cold when talking about the actual incident that he really didn't address, when he called the perpetrator an angry young man who was disturbed and went online. But this wasn't, you know, there was no concrete direction from ISIS. He wasn't ISIS directed. He just went online and pledged allegiance. And I mean, it was like, it made no sense to me. And then he takes a very passionate turn to gun control and to not, you know, banning Muslims. Instead, we have to embrace Muslims and not using the term. That's what he's passionate about.
Yeah. If I'm a black mother in Chicago, your former home, I'm going, we're losing 60, 70 people a weekend, black on black crime. We got guns everywhere, and they have some of the strictest laws in the country. Mr. President, what are you talking about? And you used to live there. You know better than any of us that it's a beautiful city, and there's like one pocket, I've heard you say this before, where the problems are. They can't get their handle on one pocket.
Couple pockets, but yeah, just outside of the fancy part of Chicago that many people know, and where the central business district is. It's not like these shootings are taking place on the streets and sidewalks there. But that being said, Ambassador Bolton, part of the reason for this speech was we were told going into it that he was going to detail exactly what our accomplishments have been cutting off the funding of ISIS. He did detail some of those accomplishments. I mean, how big of an impact are we talking about here? He said that they've been able to cut off millions of dollars of funding. He didn't give a specific number, but I mean, can we look at that and say that's a victory?
Well, I think there has been some progress against ISIS. I think on the financial side, I think on the military side in Iraq and Syria, I don't think there's any question about that. But the problem is all of this has dragged out over a lengthy period of time, during which ISIS has clearly responded to the pressure around in the Middle East by increasing its terrorist attacks in the West. That's what General Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, has said, that Europe is filled with these terrorist cells. And I think now we see the evidence of terrorist activity in the United States. So pressing on ISIS in its region is going to produce more attacks in this country. And that's why, to me, apart from the other deficiencies we've talked about, this was a missed opportunity for the president to say, what are you going to do now? Not just what have you accomplished over the past year and a half, most of which, almost all of which we've heard before, but what are you going to do to make sure the next time it's not even more Americans who are killed by these fanatics?
You know, the first point that he made, we're cutting off the funding for ISIL. If I am a family member of a victim, and I've dealt with a lot of family members of homicide victims, is what I did for 30 years. The last thing I want to hear is you're cutting off the funding for ISIL. Well, if this guy isn't part of ISIL, how is that even relevant? I mean, you're the one who keeps telling us.
That's a very good point. There's a disjunction between...
Why didn't I say it before, huh?
Well, you said it and we all heard it.
But more than that, I mean, you know, it's this lecture that, you know, we are going to contain them and destroy them. And who are you containing? Who are you destroying?
Right.
You're right. They have moved to Europe. They are now in the United States. It's summertime. It's vacation time. People don't want to go to airports. I don't feel safer.
And he says they're cutting salaries. I mean, that was the thing that I loved the most when he said ISIS is cutting salaries. Yeah. Well, this guy, he said, isn't associated with them, so they're not cutting his salary. Yeah.
Puppy's mom, and by the way, we have a record number on the live chat.
8,000.
8,000.
So 8,000 people heard your point, Judge.
Yeah, well, more than that. That's just people on the live chat, more streaming. Puppy's mom, that was the worst speech ever.
Yep.
He said we should not single out people and religions. What about if you see something, say something?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about that?
What a great point.
What a great, I mean, our viewers are brilliant. Puppy's
but you
mom,
see, you can't say something because we have just been lectured that you cannot broad brush all Muslims. Well, unless I see an actual crime where I put a gun or someone puts a gun to someone's head, then I'm being an Islamophobe. So there's no way this is going to be resolved while this man is president.
Looking back at past election years in history, to have the president step up after just an absolute tragedy, a national tragedy, and to specifically target a GOP candidate, is that unprecedented? I mean, for him to have taken such a large chunk of this speech today to target Donald Trump.
I think it is. Look, normally when you have an attack on the country or a national tragedy like we've seen, people rally around the president. The country comes together to try and do something about it. I think he divided the country with this speech. I think he turned people away from one another. They were waiting to hear how we were going to deal more effectively to prevent this from happening. And instead, he used the word Republican in this speech. He's addressing the whole nation about the terrorist threat, and he expressly went after Republicans. It wouldn't make any difference if it was a Republican president going after Democrats. This was a big mistake on his part. It's a tragedy for the nation that we've missed another opportunity to deal with this. I don't think the president's going to get it back. I think this is permanent damage to his legacy.
You just look at the outpouring around the world. The streets of London were so packed you couldn't see sidewalks yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, Paris. But see, they know already where we're going because after Charlie Hebdo, our president was absent. He wasn't in that big photo op. He sent some dignitaries.
Harris, I felt so guilty when I saw, Paris and London because I thought immediately of Charlie Hebdo.
Oh, I said it on the air
And I thought of the fact that our president could not get over there. Our Attorney General, Eric Holder, was already there and, jumped on a plane to come back to the U.S. And yet they have affection and empathy with us, and we couldn't give them when 40 world leaders, from all over the world, enemies who hated each other and bombing each other if they were in another part of the world could march together.
All right. I don't want to ignore some of what I see on the live chat as well, and I'm looking back for this person's name, so forgive me because I don't have it. A dissenting view. Ooh. That looks like we are finding the negative in things and accusing our group of not looking for the positive in what the president said. So what are the takeaways? The takeaways are that feasibly from what he said, they're being run out, ISIS, in Syria and Iraq. The problem is we've heard
where are they going?
But we've heard the words, they're on the run before about another group. So I think some of what you're picking up on from all of us is disbelief. Ambassador?
Well, it's also because there is a cost in not bringing ISIS to the point of destruction more quickly. The longer it controls territory, the more terrorists it can train, the more it can unleash around the world, the more danger there is for innocent civilians that they're going to be killed. So the slow pace of the war against ISIS is something we should worry about. And the president showed no indication whatever today he's going to pick up the pace, he's going to increase the level of activity so that ISIS is defeated sooner rather than later. That should be the objective. It spares innocent life if we bring ISIS to ground more quickly.
Generals that we've interviewed, some have been right where you're sitting, Ambassador, have told us the danger of the slow walk. And where we are right now. And it isn't just that the enemy has more time to be more emboldened. It's that our allies continue to retreat. And so I don't know what it's going to look like. And this president really, can we wait until a change is made? And if you're Hillary Clinton, what are you doing? You were watching her speech live while he was talking.
Yeah, and she was directly targeting, she was entering general election mode. I mean, she was targeting her speech directly at Donald Trump. But that being said, Ambassador, you and I talked earlier in the week about the lone wolf attacks, and here's what the president said about that today. He said these lone actors or small cells of terrorists are very hard to detect and very hard to prevent. I mean, that's sort of fact, and we know that they're living amongst us right now. I mean, that's a completely different fight than the fight that we're talking about over there.
Well, but I think it's an aspect of it that increases the terrorist consequences of ISIS activity when they're not planned, when they're not following a strict timetable, when it's harder to track them down. That worries people more than the idea that they have a master plan. I do think there's a lot we can do to keep an eye on these people. I think ISIS is way ahead of of us in their use of social media and the internet, and we're watching this happen. I think we're more at risk of this, and I think people will insist that it's the responsibility of the government in a time of war not to just sit back and say, gee, we don't know what to do about it. I think there is a connection
the way that sounded.
here.
Right.
There's not. It doesn't have to be in the form of a memo copied to 40 different people. This threat is out there and it's growing. The American people understand that, and the candidates who pick up on it, that's why I gave my political advice to Hillary Clinton earlier. If she wants to do it, if she doesn't, you can bet Donald Trump will. People will respond to that leadership. They want to be protected.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They don't want to be lectured to. They want the president to keep them safe.
Good segue from there. We're live on Facebook Live as well, facebook.com/outnumberedFNC, and we've got a healthy viewership right now. And I've just put out on the live chat on our page, our Outnumbered page, and also on Facebook Live, one question: do you feel safe? Something you said, Judge, resonated with me. So much of what you say does. But something that you said during the TV version of us about where we are and really how safe we are. And I brought up Gitmo, and I really want to hear your thoughts on the transfer of the worst from Guantanamo Bay, when our president has just said, after a terror hit here, he's concerned about the people where the savages came from. He's concerned.
And you know, here's the problem. It's almost like emptying out the jails. We've got someone who's in there who's committed a violent crime, murder, and we're going to, you know, we need to, you know, stop making the murderers out there angry. So let's let everybody out. And all of you peons out there, you know, if you're at risk, hey, deal with it. You know, get off your high horse. You know, we're cutting off their funding. I mean, this is the most bizarre charade I have ever seen. And, you know, it's about right and wrong and good and evil. It's about facing the enemy, identifying the enemy. And you know, my job had to do with someone who did a one-on-one violent crime against another individual or a gang. He has the obligation to protect Americans. Mm-hmm. He has a whole family of Americans here who are scared. You know, and those poor people in Orlando, I hope, honestly, I hope they didn't hear that speech, Harris. Oh. I hope they didn't. Because if I had a loved one in that club, I would be very angry right now. You spend your time and your energy talking about how you're going to protect us and how you're going to take these animals down. And don't tell me that, you know, I have to watch what I say.
Terry Porter says on my Twitter feed, Harris, his speech shows that Trump is getting under his skin. That's an interesting thing. All right. Thank you for the thousands of people who tuned in today. Thanks for our guests. Thank you so much for being here, Ambassador.
Thank you.
We'll see you on TV tomorrow at noon Eastern.